Most people scroll past the unbelievable ones, the titles that promise too much, the thumbnails that feel engineered specifically to make you feel stupid for clicking. But every so often something stops the finger. Not because it is loud, because it is real. And the story of a 29-year-old woman who bought a house for $1 in the middle of North Dakota, rebuilt it from the ground up with no formal training, and accidentally built a following of nearly 1 million people while doing it, is one of those stories. Not because of the dollar, because of everything that came before it. Tia Weston grew up in Fairdale, Kentucky, a quiet suburb outside Louisville where the expectations were clear and the path was well worn. Go to school, get a job, stay nearby. For a long time it looked like she was going to do exactly that, and do it better than most. She was not just a promising student. She was a legitimate athlete, an 800-meter state champion who went on to compete at Murray State University across multiple track disciplines, earning Athlete of the Week honors at the collegiate level in 2017. She trained hard, competed harder, and built the kind of mental discipline that does not come from a classroom and does not disappear when the sport ends. But athletic careers do end. And when that chapter closed, Tia found herself doing what most young people do after sport, trying to figure out what the next version of her life was supposed to look like. She landed in the health insurance industry, standard 9 to 5, back in Louisville. She bought a house, paid her bills, and did everything the way she was supposed to do it. For a while that felt like enough. Then the pandemic hit. What it did to the broader economy is well documented. What it did to individual people quietly behind closed doors is harder to measure. For Tia, it was a slow and relentless squeeze. A mortgage that felt less like an achievement and more like a weight she could not put down. She said it plainly herself. Living paycheck to paycheck with the mortgage so high she could barely breathe. There was no single dramatic breaking point. Just the accumulated reality of running the numbers every month and coming up short. The decision she made next was not impulsive, but it was honest. She looked at the life she had built in Louisville and recognized it was not the life she actually wanted. So she sold the house, cleared what she could, and did something that most people spend years talking about without ever following through on. She left. North Dakota was not the obvious choice. It is flat, remote, brutally cold for a significant portion of the year, and consistently among the least populated states in the country. When Tia told people where she was heading, most of them did not understand it. But that was part of the logic. She was not looking for a scene. She was looking for space. Housing costs in North Dakota were a fraction of what she had been paying in Louisville, and for a woman who had just spent years watching a mortgage consume her life, that single fact mattered more than everything else combined. She arrived with the proceeds from her Louisville sale and bought her first property, a $60,000 fixer-upper. She had no contractor's license, no background in construction, no formal training of any kind. What she had was an athlete's understanding of discomfort, a stubborn refusal to quit, and a network of friends and family she could call when things exceeded what one person could physically manage alone. She renovated that first property and sold it for roughly $30,000 in profit. For someone who had been barely keeping her head above water just a year earlier, that number was not just money. It was proof. Proof that the instinct she had followed, the one that told her to blow up the safe version of her life and start over somewhere nobody would have predicted, had been correct. And then she went looking for the next property. What she found instead would change everything. She had found a property she liked, ran the numbers, moved forward with real intent. And then the foundation inspection came back and killed the deal. Structural issues significant enough that walking away was the only sensible decision. She did. And then she went back to the seller, not to renegotiate, just to close the door properly and explain where things stood. That conversation could have lasted 5 minutes. Instead, it changed her life. Almost as an aside, The seller mentioned a second property. A house he had owned for decades but could never quite bring himself to part with. It had been his childhood home. The kind of place that carries a specific emotional weight that has nothing to do with its market value. The condition had deteriorated so badly over 30 years of neglect that the local fire department had already scheduled it for a controlled burn, a training exercise that would have reduced it to ash within days. The seller did not want to see that happen, not to the house he grew up in. So when Tia asked what he would want for it, his answer stopped her mid-sentence. He told her he would basically give it away to someone who would actually fix it. She asked how serious he was. He was completely serious. They drew up the paperwork on the spot. The final sale price written on that document was $1. Now, before that number creates the wrong impression, it is worth being very clear about what $1 actually purchased. The house was over 100 years old, built sometime in the 1920s. It had spent the last 3 decades being used as a personal storage facility. No running water, no functioning heat. The electrical wiring was so deteriorated it was essentially non-existent as a working system. Every single utility that makes a building habitable had to be rebuilt entirely from scratch. Plumbing, electrical, heating, windows, insulation, flooring. The local fire department had not flagged it for demolition as a formality. They had flagged it because professionals who understood buildings had looked at it and decided it was beyond saving. Tia signed the paperwork anyway, and then she set a budget of $30,000, the same profit she had walked away with from her first flip, and started filming. The first videos were simple. A woman, a condemned house, $1, and a camera pointed at whatever was actually happening that day. No production crew, no polished narrative, no content strategy designed by someone who had never held a power tool. Just footage of the demolition, the mess, the reality of what it actually looks like to gut a 100-year-old building in the middle of a North Dakota winter. She posted to TikTok first. The clip explaining how she bought the house for $1 collected over 80,000 likes. The comments flooded in, a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and the specific kind of emotional investment that content creators spend years trying to manufacture and almost never achieve. Viewers were not just entertained. They needed to know if she was going to pull it off. That was the hook, not the dollar. The stakes. Real documented financial and personal stakes that an audience could follow week by week. The Times ran her story. The Daily Mail picked it up. YouTube subscribers climbed past 100,000 and kept climbing. By early 2026, the channel had surpassed 538,000 subscribers with nearly 2 million total views. Her TikTok had accumulated 3.7 million likes. Her Facebook page crossed 955,000 likes. Her Instagram reached 320,000 followers. For a woman who less than 3 years earlier had been quietly drowning under a Louisville mortgage, the scale of that response was almost impossible to process. She described it simply. She called it insane. She talked about the messages from followers who told her she was living out dreams they had carried their whole lives. One comment stayed with her. A viewer wrote that they had just turned 74 years old and that Tia was doing what they had dreamed of doing their entire adult life. That is not an algorithm. That is a nerve. And the North Dakota winter was just getting started. Going viral is the easy part. Nobody talks about what happens the morning after. When the comments are still coming in and the audience is still growing and the expectations have arrived with them, and you still have to go back inside a gutted, heatless 100-year-old building in the middle of January and keep working. North Dakota winter is not a backdrop. It is an adversary. Temperatures in that region routinely drop to 20 below zero. Not wind chill, actual air temperature. The kind of cold that makes materials brittle, tools unreliable, and the human body is tolerance for sustained discomfort, something that gets tested every single day. Tia was working in conditions that professional contractors with full equipment and heated workspaces would approach cautiously. She was doing it alone, without formal training, in a structure with no functioning heat source, documenting every step for an audience of hundreds of thousands. One episode in the series was filmed at 20 below zero, not as a dramatic storytelling device, because that was simply the reality of what was happening that week. And Tia pointed the camera at it anyway. There were moments that came close to breaking the project. Pipes that could not be installed until temperatures allowed. Materials that behaved differently in extreme cold than they were supposed to. The physical weight of doing heavy demolition and reconstruction day after day in an environment that actively worked against every effort. She said nothing was hidden. When something went wrong, she said so on camera. When a week was brutal, the footage showed it. That honesty built a level of viewer loyalty that no engagement metric can fully capture. People were not watching a renovation. They were quietly willing someone they had never met to succeed. And slowly, painfully, section by section, room by room, took 37 weeks. From the first day she walked in with a camera and a demolition mindset to the moment the main floor was complete. 37 weeks of continuous, documented, grueling work. The finished result was everything the original footage had made it almost impossible to imagine. Painted rooms, tiled bathrooms, refinished floors, a greenhouse she built and documented start to finish. A bedroom that looked like something from a design publication rather than the debris-filled shell it had been when she first unlocked the door. She had tackled structural repairs, plumbing, electrical systems, windows, insulation, and flooring, every major system in a 100-year-old building, without a single formal qualification to her name. She had simply figured it out one problem at a time and refused to stop. The financial transformation had been as complete as the physical one. By early 2026, estimated net worth figures placed her around $500,000. Monthly YouTube earnings alone were running between $12,000 and $15,000. For someone who had been living paycheck to paycheck just a few years earlier, those numbers represent a reversal most people would find genuinely difficult to comprehend. She had not just renovated a house. She had renovated her entire financial reality from the ground up. But the story did not stop at the front door of the dollar house. In late 2025, Tia purchased her second abandoned property, a house that had been frozen in time since its owner passed away in December 2005. Cigarette butt still in the ashtray. Dishes still on the drying rack. A calendar on the kitchen wall still showing December 2005. She paid $15,000 for it and said her goal was bigger than any single renovation. She lived in a small town full of empty houses that had been sitting untouched for years. Her goal was to bring them back to life one by one. And every time someone did that, she said, it helped the whole town. That is the detail the viral headline never includes. The dollar was the price. The town was the reason. A 74-year-old viewer once told her she was doing what they had dreamed of doing their entire adult life. A health insurance worker from Kentucky who could barely make her mortgage payments is now the person people send that message to. The dollar house is finished. The story it started is still being written.